Hello, everyone, and welcome back for season 2 of Out of the Office. And we're changing things up a little bit for this season, and we're going to just jump straight into the content, no introductions, no nothing like that, based on your feedback. So we have the wonderful Tashan to speak with us today. Tashan, say hello to our listeners.
Hey everyone, my name is Tashan, pronouns he, they, and excited to get into it today.
Me too. I think it doesn't feel like it's been that long since recording season 1, but we were just chatting before we hit record of like, I'm actually quite nervous because obviously I'm changing a few things and I'm trying to like figure out the warm up. And I was saying how before the introduction and doing all these things, it helps me warm up. And it feels like so cold turkey to just jump straight back into it and like, here you go, hello, hi.
Into the deep end, it's just like, whoa, we're in it now.
And I was saying to Tashan that you're a bit of a guinea pig for this new season and for the new approaches that we're going to have for the podcast, which I'm really excited for. And I think our listeners are going to really enjoy the new features that we have for this.
Yeah, I'm really excited by it too, and I love change. So, her famous last words. But I love change, so happy to be the guinea pig and excited to be a part of it as well. It's such a great first season, so now coming in to be a part of it, yeah, really excites me.
Yeah, and just throwing it back to season 1, the reason that we actually know each other is because of one of the guests that are on season 1, which is Asha. And she
Yes.
did Diversity Day, which was honestly, I had such great feedback about that episode. People really found it so insightful. So shout out to Asha for introducing us because
Yes,
she
honestly,
has the
shout out
best network.
in general. Like Asha is genuinely one of the loveliest people and will just straight connect you to people and be like, look, I think you two are awesome. Meet.
Yeah, she's good like that. And yeah, we were talking about the world's best boss mug feature, which is something that I'm going to still keep in the podcast, but we're actually going to leave it to the end because I want to see if people will just hold on to just find out at the end about the world's best. So, Tashan, you have the whole episode, this whole recording,
Yes.
to think about what your answer to that question is going to
Oh
be.
my god! I'm like, what is it? Oh, so yeah, let's let me think. Let me think.
So, today's episode, we're talking about quite a good one, which is body language, which is quite a funny episode because there's kind of like two themes running alongside it. So, this is season 6, so quite a lot later on, and episode 23. And specifically, I wanted to talk about this one because they launch a minority executive training program called Print in All Colors, which I think the premise is pretty smart. I think it's quite a good idea. And the idea is to essentially help racial and ethnic minorities rise up through the ranks in the company because obviously this company realizes they don't actually have that diversity they would like to see, especially in senior leadership. I think this is something that a lot of organizations struggle with, right? And I don't know from your experience about these programs, like what makes them so important to have?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think one, it starts with the recognition that actually there is a disparity. I think there's been a lot of work, and it's the industry that I work in, one of them, one of the many, the advertising industry. We have the All In survey, and so you can actually see from the data the percentage of, say, people from racialized backgrounds in different levels and tiers, and you can see compared to the I guess the rest of the population or even the London working population, when you get higher up, actually there is that disparity. So one, these programs are really good because it's just being open and honest, saying actually this is something that we want to work on, this is something that we want to invest in to work against. Two, I think also for that racialized person in that position, someone actually investing in training is an actual positive action. For me, training is one of the most important things, and I think sometimes people can get left by the wayside. I think that's the phrasing. And if you don't necessarily have that dynamic in your organization where you are working with a leader who sees you, hears you, acknowledges you, and wants you to grow and understands where you're coming from, then you're just kind of there, like in the dark, just trying to like work out what's going on. And so, actually, having structured and objectively growth-led training at least gives you that sense of, oh, this is the skills that are necessary. Because sometimes it might be, actually, I actually know this stuff already, and I'm actually demonstrating this. And so if this is what it takes, and I'm already demonstrating this and I can evidence it, why am I not moving upwards? It can even shine a light on some of those things and give you that language and that toolkit to be able to actually reposition things and be like, I actually have done the training now. I can show how I was already demonstrating that. And so this is actually where I should be if this is what parity looks like for someone like me.
Absolutely. And I think that just what you were saying in terms of having the language, because the skill set is already there. It's not like, I know there's so many programs out there that like, we need to empower people, we need to give the voice to
Mm,
the people. And I'm like, the voice is already there, the empowerment is
yes.
already there, but it's just open the doors and allowing that voice to be heard and to be listening to that voice and to recognize that talent in the room. And I actually I want to ask a couple of questions just in terms of the language you're using, because I find it really interesting, and I think our listeners will as well, because obviously I say racial and ethnic minorities because of the show, right? Because
Yes.
we're talking about in the essence of, they have this print in all colors program, and they talk about minorities and encouraging minorities,
Mhm.
and then obviously noticing you saying racialized groups and things like that. So it's
Yeah.
really interesting. So I just really value hearing more about your choice of.
Yes. I think we have to be incredibly careful with the words that we use, and the impact that they have. I think there is a recognition of a fact, right, that actually someone can be a minority in a minority group in an organization. But I think when we start to badge people as, you are a minority, you are this race, I think we begin to treat everyone like they're a monolith. Like, even in the episode, we begin to see this comparison between the two, and actually, one is they're from two distinct backgrounds. They have completely different skills, etc. And so, when I say racialized, or even when I say minoritized, I use them intentionally because actually, in a different country, it wouldn't be that, right? And so I think it's really important to highlight this is something that's being put on these communities as opposed to something these communities are choosing. Because, again, even with the context of these courses, I think it's really important to think, okay, who is the one that needs to do the work here? Obviously, it's both, but it has to be both. And the recognition does have to come from, actually, this racialized existence is a construct that's been put on someone because of a historic and systematic removal of access to resources. And so we've got to this place now where actually things are imbalanced because we've had a systematic and historic removal to that access, and now we're trying to rebalance it. But for me, if we don't use that language, it's as if we're saying, oh, they chose to be this. That's for me. I'm not saying everyone will feel that, but they've chosen this. They just happen to be a minority. Well, they happen to be that because of all the stuff that happened before. And it's not to say we need to use shame or use a shame stick to kind of be like, this is the past. It's just recognition that this is something that's happening to them. I listened to this really great talk, actually, and it was talking about people living with impairments. And the speaker called it people either living with disability or disabled people, depending on how they want to frame it. But the language I use there, and it's the same that I hear with the concept of being of a race, is that someone is not disabled. The disabling factor is society, and society makes someone disabled. And so, in that same vein, we need to see the societal construct that is making that person be viewed in that way.
1,000,000%. Oh my goodness. I feel like we could just package that up and it could be like a reel on its own. I think, yeah, I agree with you. Language is so, so important. I know people talk about referencing it as like global majority, because actually, if you look at it from a global lens, black and brown people are actually the majority. So it kind of doesn't make sense to call people that group the minority. But as you were talking, it kind of reminds me of, people don't use it as much, but the BAME acronym, so Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, and that was huge. I would say probably like 5-10 years ago, and everyone was using that. And I think this print in all colors program from The Office is kind of like that, where they kind of
Yes.
bucket everybody into this like
Being
huge umbrella, right? It's like, and the experiences of all Black people or all Asian people
Mm,
or anyone that is considered an ethnic minority is so diverse, right? And we talked
yes.
about this in the podcast before around intersectionality. So, if we think about within the Asian community, there may be differences between someone who is from a Pakistani heritage versus someone with an Indian heritage. If you think about, someone with an African heritage versus someone with a Caribbean heritage, there can be such distinct differences within those groups. So when you have BAME as a whole, it doesn't see that. And even when you use like one label within that, it's still such a blanket statement because actually you're not understanding the different diversity traits that people will have. And I also think about diversity characteristics in terms of like inherent and acquired, because I think about when you look at a workplace and you might think it looks diverse, right? You can see
Yes.
Black people, you can see brown people, you can see lots of different types of faces in the room. But then people start talking and they start sharing their experiences, and then you kind of unpack a little bit about, oh, they've all gone to the same educational
Yeah.
institution. They all come from the same town. They all like the same things.
Yes.
And you're like, actually, you might have some diversity, but actually
Mhm.
everyone has a very similar lived experience. Obviously, not completely the same, but actually the
Absolutely.
ideas will be kind of similar. So really interrogating that diversity in the workplace is really important.
I completely agree with you. Like, Asia is a continent. Africa is a continent. So I don't know, when we group people together, I'm just like, what? Like, do we realize that is the exact same as saying an Italian, a French, a German, and an English person are all one? And we would just never do that. So that point of intersectionality is so important, and especially understanding that paradigm versus non-visible characteristics as well, such as your gender. How does that interact with your lived experience, such as your sexual orientation? How does that interact? Because until we start to have some of these layers and deconstruct what that means in a really open and honest way, with programs like this, I think, yeah, to your point, it could even just be actually, are we talking to people who are in fact actually quite similar, but the only difference is that they are from different racialized backgrounds, for example? And that's being really reductive, right? Obviously they'll have varied experiences, but actually, what about people from working class backgrounds? What about that inclusion? What about people from backgrounds of perhaps first generation immigrants, second generation immigrants? Like, when we start to deconstruct these layers, people that haven't been to tertiary education. So when we start to think about all these different layers, actually, we think, how inclusive are we, and what? And also, when you think of the program design, actually, how do I need to make that program so that it caters for all people? Because again, if you haven't had that thought from the beginning, these programs can be quite generic, and actually it's not suited for even different learning styles and people with that experience and have neurodivergence. So yeah.
Yeah, if someone that's listening is thinking about starting these kind of programs, which is great, you've
Mm.
recognized that there's a gap and something that needs to be fixed within the organization. What have you seen work well when it comes to like the beginning stages of setting up that program? And how do they do it where they are thinking about that intersectionality and thinking about the multitude of diversity that people may or may not have?
That's such a good question. I think I think with everything that's happened over the last few years, because there is so much content out there, sometimes people, I think, you have two extremes. You have the, I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm not going to do anything, and I've read all the books, I'm the savior, and then you have everything in between. There's so many people doing great work as well. But when we think of those two extremes, I think sometimes that we forget we can speak to our community of people and just have a conversation and ask, what is it you need? And for me, that's when it works really well, when that has been point one, where the consultation has been not, I'm telling you this is what you need to thrive. Because again, that's giving very much like, okay, you could do better if, okay, what about we ask them what is they need, and we can recognize the success traits of an organization. And then there's two things that need to happen there, I'd imagine. There's the, okay, how do we create a course that takes you from here to here, the success traits. But then also part two of that is, how do we deconstruct these success traits and understand what is actually in these? Are these success traits actually relevant for the organization, or could we diversify these success traits and actually look at what we've got from our initial consultation and actually expand our definition of success? And so that's where I think those two things come into play, using that consultation to design the course, but also using it to think, is our idea of success still relevant right now? Every part of it. Are there ways that we can enhance it and we can develop it? And then I think it's going through an iterative process of, okay, you've designed your course, and doing a pilot. I think it's always great to do a pilot, and take things slowly. I think sometimes we want a quick fix, and this is life's work, unfortunately. Things aren't going to just change overnight. We're not going to do an unconscious bias training and everyone is now going to remove bias, because that's just not how it works. So actually, it's, let's take our time, let's get it right, and let's include people on the journey. So it's not a tell, it's a sharing. We're in this together, so we're coming as peers, not I'm up here, you're down here, how can I bring you up? It's, we're peers, how do we grow together?
I love that. And thinking about it in the context of this particular episode, and we'll watch a clip in a specific moment, but it makes me think about their Print in All Colours program, because actually it took one of the members of staff to go around and speak to people directly and say, hey, did you know this program exists? But obviously, if they took the approach that you're talking about, where you're working with people to kind of find
Mm,
out what is it that you need and how would you be able to succeed here, they would already know about the program from the get-go, so they
mm,
wouldn't need to be told about it to then register. And that is also waiting for somebody to identify them and tell them about it, which kind of loses its purpose, right? If someone is part of the process, they know about it, then they can be part of it from the start, rather than finding out about it later, or they've missed a deadline or missed an opportunity. Because sometimes in this kind of not just these kind of programs, but generally in the workplace, there's that saying of, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So that kind of instance, it would require someone telling you about this program, and you might not necessarily know, especially if you're a huge global organization. There's so
yeah.
much stuff coming out. There's so many newsletters and internal, memos that are coming out. So you're bound to just be like missing things. And yeah, I think that community led thing is so important. I think it helps build a sustainable program, because people feel invested because they've been part of it and they want it to succeed.
Mm,
There's this when you were talking about bias, it made me think of a specific one, which is the IKEA effect. I don't know if you've heard of
mm.
it before.
No.
So essentially, they use it a lot in kind of like a school program. But the idea is that when you kind of go to IKEA, you buy flat pack furniture, you put it together, you feel quite proud of it, right? You're like, oh my goodness, look at
Mm,
this, like cupboard that I'm like putting this all together with my little hammer and Allen key and whatever else. And so you treat it with more respect, and you kind of love it more
yes.
because you've actually worked on it and built it. So the IKEA effect is essentially to see any success of some program happen, or anything that you're kind of putting together. If you get people involved and build it with them, there is such a stronger chance that they will be so much more invested and love what's being made, because they've been part of it. You can't help but feel proud of your own creations of sorts. So, you know, sometimes I know we talk about bias and unconscious biases in a negative way, but there's ways to use it positively, right?
Yeah,
To get that buy-in.
I completely agree. There's so many like mind hacks and where we feel that sense of belonging, that actually by including someone, it's that inclusivity lens, right? It is actually, inclusivity is actually including them in the creation of, like, how can you be inclusive along every single touch point of this course creation and course sharing? So yeah, I love that IKEA effect. I'm definitely going to reference that.
Please do. Okay, let's do our first reaction to a clip from The Office. So in this particular scene, we obviously see an exchange between Gabe, Dwight, and Daryl. And I won't tell you too much. Let's just watch it, see what happens, and then we can chat about it.
What is this?
This is Print in All Colors, Saber's Minority Executive Training Program.
It doesn't just sound aight, it sounds amazing.
I didn't say I.
How do I apply?
You have to be a minority.
Glasses wearers, cholera survivors, geniuses, non-organic family farmers. The list goes on and on. You want me to keep
Those
going?
don't really count.
There we go. So there's the specific clip that
Mm.
I wanted us to like live react to. There's so many things in there that I'm like, if you could see,
So much.
there's like microaggressions. There's like this idea around like meritocracy as well, and like
Yeah.
trying to devalue someone. Yeah, there's just so much there. I'd love to hear your initial thoughts, Tashan.
Yeah. Oh, honestly, there's so many different things. I think almost working backwards, that sense of comparing the different racialized minority people within an organization. And I don't know if there's this sense of like it's giving they are now in competition with each other. And so that is the antithesis of what these schemes are meant to be. It's meant to be an empowering thing where people are given the opportunity to grow and shine a light. But when they become thrust into, I guess, the corporate mechanism, they can become quite competitive. And it can become, oh, I didn't necessarily get on the scheme. Does that mean I'm less than? And it can sometimes have the reversed effect of perpetuating that less than narrative, which they were speaking about at the end. Like, I'd rather this one, not that one. Oh, so many things. Also, just the beginning of that, even just that conversation of like, oh, I could be the next Michael, let's say, and that's a positive like aspiration vibe, right? But even the fact, like, sorry, so many things. Even the fact that Michael in this whole episode, Michael is not one having the conversation with either of these people is actually wild. Like, it's all coming from like colleagues and peers, and
Mhm.
so it's all like intra office. And actually, where is the leadership? Where's the leadership? Where's the positive
100%.
leadership and the positive encouragement of this? And obviously you have the person that's recruiting everyone, and again that is their sole aim. There's like, I need to recruit someone, and actually they just need to be someone that is this, someone that is a race from a racial minority. We're talking more this, if that makes sense. Even when they reference, sorry, we're thinking more specifically racial minorities, which in a way is like, oh, okay, yeah, something for people, but the notion that it's exclusionary of other things, I think needs to be unpacked a bit further, because actually even with racialized minorities, we are so many things. We're not a monolith.
100%. Yeah. The monolith point is really interesting. And there's another clip that we'll watch later, which I think will expand on that monolith point a lot more, because it's such a huge one. And I think it was great that Gabe, he was speaking to Daryl about this. And as you say, Michael Scott, the manager of the branch, should be the one, championing his employees and saying, hey, have you heard about this program? Anyone interested to join? Because Daryl's not the only person in the office that could apply. There's quite a few, people with the branch that could. But Michael is too busy trying to figure out if there's some random woman that likes him or not in the episode. But that just
So
goes to
much
show
even in that I was
yeah, that one is super problematic. It's really interesting because I think a lot of people would love to put people forward for these kind of programs and, initiatives. And I feel like people do feel like clumsy or awkward of like, oh, I don't want to like make it a thing that I'm talking about someone's, racial identity or the color of their skin. And it's like, oh, how do I approach someone? Because, unfortunately, a lot of organizations, they will have pretty bad managers, but there will be good initiatives that they're just not promoting. And so, there might be people that know about stuff and want to put people forward because, they respect their colleagues, they respect their peers, but not knowing how to broach it. And in my opinion, I think sometimes in these situations, it's just recommending, it's just sharing that with people to say, look, I don't know how you feel about this program, but I've come across this, may or may not be of interest to you. Go ahead. And I think that's fine. I think people do worry about othering people and then end up not saying anything at all, which I think actually does more damage than anything
yeah.
else.
I completely agree. Like, I'm black, I know I'm black.
Really?
I don't speak. I do not speak. Again, not on my lip. I do not speak for all black people when I say this. But what I will say is, if you come to me saying I've seen this program for black professionals, and I think you'd be really great for it, I have agency, and I can say yes or no. And actually, sometimes I think, and just in general for life as a coach, if I could say anything, is we have to begin to be okay with discomfort, not with problematic behavior and harmful behavior. So harm, but we have to begin to recognize what's the difference between harm and discomfort. So if someone was to say that to me and I was like, oh, actually, I don't want to be seen as this, I can say no. And then I have agency to say, actually, in future, um, I don't necessarily want to find out about these kind of programs or have this conversation. Equally, someone conversing with me has agency to say, is this something that you'll be comfortable with? So I think permission asking is a great way for us to find out. I think we always think we have to have the answers, but actually we don't. So from the coach's toolkit, asking permission for things is always a great way. And then being okay with the discomfort if someone has a reaction that you don't necessarily want, because actually just because you want to in your world help someone, it doesn't mean that your help is what they need, and it doesn't mean that they want to receive that either. So if they're like, no, sorry, don't care, that's okay. That's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's
I
okay.
think obviously in that particular clip, Dwight is exhibiting some problematic behaviors.
Completely harmful.
Understatement. But I think there's something that we can actually learn from him in that situation where he's almost saying things, like doing things. I know he shouldn't be saying those things and doing those things,
Yeah.
but I think sometimes I see from experience when working with people and working with clients that people are their intention is there, they want to do some great things, but they're so
Mm,
worried and scared of saying things and doing
mm,
these, putting people forward for these programs. And you've got people like Dwight, and there are people like Dwight in workplaces that are like, "Oh, I don't know about this person, I don't know if they should do this." The fact that he makes the comment of like, oh, he was driving a forklift 10 minutes ago, and I'm like, one, that's just completely belittling someone's skill set and experience. Like,
yeah,
what does driving a forklift or not mean in terms of your ability and capability to fulfill a management role? Like, if anything, if you can drive that thing around and organize, like Daryl was really amazing in this show in terms of
yes,
how he organizes the entire warehouse team and keeps them, I think, keeps their morale up when they know they've got someone like
mm,
Michael Scott managing them, is really
yeah,
commendable. And he would be a perfect person for this kind of program. And
yeah,
I think even what you were saying at the beginning, I don't even think he's someone that needs to go on that program. He already has the skills. He already has the
yes,
capability to do the
yes.
role. It's just having those doors open for him to be put forward for those opportunities.
Absolutely. It's just like shining a light. It's like it's actually just shining a light and being like, oh, you've been there the whole time, but now here's a door that where people might actually see you. I think as well, I think the thing about Dwight and everything, it brings about the question of like status and privilege in a way. Now, I don't necessarily want to like deviate all the way into this privilege thing, because I do think there's like a delicate balance between like privilege shaming and like actually where we want to move to positive outcomes and positive change. But the fact that he has the agency to go around and hunt for minoritized individuals around the company. Um, one also is giving when they say, "Oh, we couldn't find anyone for the job." Actually, if you try, you can. So
Yeah,
that's a positive. That's a positive version of it. But two, this is why the program exists, right? Because there are people in those positions that actually recognize the power status that they have, even if it's not active or if it is conscious, like them saying it, but actually by their actions they are. Because to approach someone and say, I think you should do this, and to be like, I think that's the right person, I think that's the wrong person, that is status. That is, I'm over here and I believe I have the right mindset, skills, resources, autonomy to decide what is best.
yeah, because who is Dwight to make that kind of comment? Like, why does he know best in this situation? he's nobody here.
He's like, what? Like,
Yeah, when I hear people talk about, in like, whether it's in workshops or, you know, you overhear conversations and you will hear people talk about subject areas that I'm like, you know nothing about this. You don't understand this fully. So, you know, when you hear a white person talking about, you know, race and, you know, that meritocracy point around, you know, oh, I just want to hire the best person for the role. And I'm just like, I just want to shake people, because I'm like, you're looking at this at such a lens of your own personal lived experience and your understanding of the world around you. You haven't thought to step outside of your own bubble and understand how differently people experience society and progression and opportunities. Because, well, I won't say anything bad, but they haven't bothered. And that just, as you say, goes to show their privilege. And that's exactly what's happening in this situation. And I think that's sometimes what can happen when you start these programs, where people have like a knee-jerk reaction and like get defensive, because I've seen people actually boldly claim, oh, I've missed out on opportunities because I'm a white cis man. And I'm like, mm, I'm like, I don't want to deny that someone's obviously had that experience. But I'm also, I don't think you're really hearing what you're saying. Like, there is so many more opportunities for someone like you to progress and to find these roles and to be put forward for these opportunities. But when you are a black and brown or racialized individual, whether you are someone with a disability, sexual orientation, all of these things, these all add elements of barriers to you know, these roles. And so these programs are around that equity point, right? Really understanding the different points that people start within an organization and addressing those head on, rather than just like kind of umming and ahhing around it and just continuing to keep the status quo. It's about readdressing that imbalance.
yeah, completely. Like, I think it's such a nuanced point in terms of that point around people being denied experiences, etc. I don't necessarily have a view on that right now, but what I will say is, I just think, let's just look at the numbers, and I think about the macro, the micro. For all intents and purposes, someone's individual experience could be marred by a sense of getting missed by opportunities, as many others can, right? So I believe there is truth in that. But when we look at the macro and take a step back to your point, when we actually think of different people's experiences, when I see these sentiments, sometimes I look at the companies and I'm just like, your company isn't all black now. Your company isn't all women now. Your company isn't all LGBTQIA plus people now. What do you mean? Like, your board is still 70% male. And it's just to say, let's just stick to the facts. When we're talking about our individualized experiences, though, yeah, everyone has the right to say what they believe has happened to them. But let's stick to the facts and let's look at what's actually, when we look at what's happened. And I know, especially recently, with like, I think there's a big microscope on diversity and inclusion at the moment, and thinking about what the impact has been. And I think wholly we can see that the impact has been positive, but sustainable change is long term. And so if we were to judge the life of a human being in terms of completeness and knowledge, etc., by the first 3 years, it would be like, that doesn't make sense, because that's a toddler, right? Of course, they've only lived 3 years. That's like, the lifespan is this. So I do think, again, using the macro, we need to begin to, with these programs, with everything, take a step back and look at the long-term view, not just how many people have improved, how many people have got promotions this year, how many people have said that they feel better in their jobs. That is really great short-term metrics. But really, your meeting of once a week talking about leadership skills is going to empower the individual. But also, if they're going back into a disempowered space, like, for example, Daryl, for example, and going back into a space that is disempowered, where locally the people around you aren't encouraging you to be the version of yourself that course that happened over there empowered you to be, well, where are you spending most of your time? So the work has to be done outside of the space as well. It's not enough just to put someone on a scheme and expect that everything's going to change when the environment with which they're in is the reason, part of the reason why they're not growing where they need to be in the first place. You have to change the environment as well. And I don't know. I don't have an equation, but I definitely bet my bottom dollar that the environment will be a stronger causal factor on the progression than, say, that one individual's skills. That's anecdotal, of course, but environment is just such an important factor to our habit creation, to our ability to grow, and to our self-knowing, and our ability to navigate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. It's yeah. I mean, I loved everything you said, and I think it's just so important to really remind ourselves that these programs are great, but they're not great in isolation. They can only do so much, as you said, right? It needs to have a holistic view across the entire global, or wherever you are based, organization, and particularly with this program, you know, the print in all colors initiative happens, and then everything goes back to the way that it was. Everyone goes back to the same positions, and the person that actually gets through is Kelly, and she just comes back in these like really cool suits, and she looks amazing.
Yeah.
But in terms of like progression and routes for her to be, you know, an executive, that there's not real change there. You know, Michael Scott continues to be the manager, and I think that's why people get disillusioned in organizations, because, you know, people that are minoritized in an organization will do all the right things, right? They will do all the things that their managers tell them to. Go and do this program, do this coaching, go for this program, do this stuff. And then they do, but nothing changes. Everything stays the same because they've done all the work. And that's what we were saying at the beginning. Everyone has these skills already. These people are already there. It's opening the door and putting these people into those positions of power, because that's the change that we need to see.
100%. I think these courses could do. Actually, no, I think there's lots of great courses, to be honest. I think it is really difficult in the workplace to manage expectations just because things aren't linear. And so sometimes you can do these things and it sells dreams that were never going to be true, because it goes back to that initial point that I was making. If your success criteria is in and of itself biased in some way, or is not communicated with complete clarity that it's a known success criteria, an objective known success criteria that is shared and someone can work towards, then there's always going to be this mismatch of people who think they're doing the right thing and they're growing, and actually they're not exhibiting the behaviors, the characteristics that are deemable of a promotion, because there's not that clarity or objectivity, or there is a bias and there's a particular type of person that fits the mold, and it means maybe masking, changing some parts of yourself, becoming more of this type of person, which might be more difficult for some than others. But until that clarity is there, it's I don't know, there's always going to be some imbalance.
Yeah, I agree. Shall we watch the last clip?
Yes,
Shall
let's
we
do
react
it.
to the second clip, and then yeah, we'll chat about that. And sadly, that means we'll come to the end of the podcast, which I honestly cannot believe has come around so quick. So let's watch this
Same.
and we'll see what happens.
Hello.
It's very nice. I never noticed that before.
Sometimes my bangs cover it.
Yeah. I don't want to be offensive, but may I ask you what that means?
I do find that offensive, actually.
So a very short clip, but I just think
Yeah.
it's really funny. So basically, the context is obviously Kelly, who never dresses in a kind of Indian outfit or a sari in the office ever, never wears a bindi as far as I'm aware, unless it's like an event like the Diwali episode. But she obviously dresses up and then sits down. And it's so interesting because that exchange between her and Gabe, who is a white man, is quite indicative of what happens sometimes, because as we were saying around being a monolith, it just takes one person to say, oh, I'm so hugely offended by something. And that person will be like, okay, everyone finds that offensive, so I'm never going to talk about that. And then they kind of, as you say, lean into that. They don't, sorry, they err away from that discomfort and then not talk about it ever again. And you know that they kind of feel clumsy and awkward talking to people.
Yeah.
You can just see it in their faces, like, oh my God, there's a brown person here. What do I say? What do I do? And it's like,
Yes.
why are you tiptoeing around me? Like, it's going to be okay. But the flip is, I've been in workshops and conversations where someone will just jump in and be like, I don't care what you ask me everything about my identity. I'm fasting, ask me about it. Oh, I'm this, ask me about it. And I'm like, I'm happy for you, and I'm glad that you want to be open. That's amazing, but not everybody is like that. And I think that's the danger of seeing, your friend or your peer who represents a community and then thinking that represents the entire community's perspective.
I completely agree. I think it goes back to that point around being okay with discomfort and recognizing discomfort versus harm, and actually being able to discern between those two things. I, again, don't speak for everyone, but I as a coach, it's my job to be curious, and it's my job to ask questions, and it's my job to think carefully about those questions, but also just speak openly and use clean and like inclusive language, right? But if we just go back to basics, and like the interrogatives of like who, where, what, how, why, when, I think I covered most of them, and go back to literally just like the basics that many of us were exposed to. Of course, everyone's had very different experiences, but many of us were exposed to. We can deconstruct it and make it less complicated. Combining that with asking permission, I definitely think it would give us a lot more communication to say, I'm super curious about your culture, but I didn't want to offend you. Is it all right if I asked you a question around Eid? And then they can be like, no. Or they can be like, yeah. And so it's actually just that asking permission, and just like, I noticed that, and it could be sharing, I think always sharing an observation in a neutral way is always really powerful as well. It's just like, I noticed in the meeting yesterday, you seemed quite uncomfortable when we were talking about this topic. Is that something you wanted to talk about? And they can be like, no. And actually might be like, is that something you'd like to talk about with someone, but maybe not me, etc. Because actually, maybe you haven't fostered that relationship. And so I think it's just that curiosity, I think, is a wonderful tool to help people navigate through what can be this messy middle of like, I'm super ally to I'm unconsciously, I don't know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think taking a step back in terms of, as you were saying, understanding the relationship that you have with that individual, because there could be power dynamics at play. Because
Yeah.
even when you ask that question, like, do you mind me asking, if you are a leader and that's, your employee, the dynamic means that they might feel they have to tell you, they're obligated to share
Yeah.
that with you.
Yes.
And they might not have that safety to like say no. So it's, taking that step back to go, okay, what is the dynamic here? What's the relationship like? And being mindful, as you say, about the specific language that you use, and being okay if someone says no, and knowing that doesn't mean that everyone is going to say no. It just means that that specific individual doesn't want to share that with you, and that's absolutely okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. That specific individual. Again, it's not, this individual does not now represent that whole group. And I think that's what comes up a lot, is that notion of like, oh, I had this one bad experience. And this isn't just to do with, say, just minoritized groups, etc. This happens in all walks of life, where our brain does this, right? We have an experience, and our brain is constantly trying to assess threat, safety, belonging, connection, and looking for cues of that, essentially, to say, can I be my authentic self here or not? And so if you've had an experience that rejects that, then actually you might continue to do that behavior. So I do think mindfulness is an incredibly important tool as well, because I think it is very natural. Our brain is evaluative and it's judgmental. Like, it's always judging. Like, no one is not judgmental. So actually just recognizing that and being okay with judgment is just not staying in judgment. It's like, oh my God, the last time I did this, this happened. And actually in that moment, you can actually recognize that and be like, yeah, that did happen. That was really bad. That made me feel really uncomfortable. But that isn't this moment. And so, am I going to choose to ask this question? And you still might be like, no, I don't feel comfortable. But at least as you keep having that mindful process of just like interjecting and where you are in your thoughts before your actions, then you might get to the point where, no, actually, that moment doesn't need to define my every interaction now. But that mindfulness, I don't know, I think it's such an important point, because I think it's really unrealistic for us just to expect everyone just to change overnight, or to recognize all of these things in this specific area, when in every other area of life we don't do it, and we have all these biases that lead us to behave in a certain way.
You know, I could listen to you talk all day, to be honest. This has been so wonderful, honestly.
Best, honestly. I just like season 3.
Oh, 100%. So, as I said at the beginning, and you've had the whole episode to think about it.
Yes.
If you had a world's best boss, well, a version of that yourself, what would yours be?
Okay, I've been thinking about this, and I'm going to say the answer that I think is truthful, rather than the answer that I think is like, oh my god, that's great marketing. Well, this coach. No, I think I'm world's best energizer. I'm really able to like put a lot of energy into people, concepts, and things, and bring it to life. And I think I'm one of the best at doing that, and it's just natural to me. Like I love being energized. Like this is my favorite thing. I love getting excited about things. So yeah, world's best energizer.
I love that. And I agree with you, because I think, I was feeling really excited about the podcast, but I just feel even more energized after I chat, because sometimes with being a podcast host, I'm like, okay, nervous, and like, you know, you're so on the game throughout the episode. And now I'm just like, I'm ready and raring to go for the rest of the day. So I'm just grateful for you sharing your energy. And I'm sure our listeners will be buzzing as well.
Yeah, no, this has been so great. Your energy's been amazing. So honestly, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And I know you talked about World's Best Coach. I know you talked about this program that you're working on. Do you want to share a little bit with our listeners about that, in terms of how they can learn more, and be in touch with you in terms of the stuff that you do?
Absolutely. Yeah, so a big passion area of mine is helping people from underserved communities. Hello, I'm here. But one of my things is about strengths, and a lot of this time there's this like, that's why I hate the word minority or sometimes, because there's this lack story that gets perpetuated around being a minority sometimes. And it's not to say we should deviate from the facts, but what I want to work on is creating a strength-based narrative and helping people to be their best, most impactful self. I've done my education in basically performance coaching, getting people to be their best. And so for me, it's like, how do I bring that and create these environments? So my course is going to be a 4-week course that helps people from underserved communities, and that can be any community, right? It's not specific, to understand what their strengths are, to capitalize on those strengths, and then to create the habits and systems that allow them to basically galvanize on whatever their goals are for their life. But I think it all starts from that story of self and really positioning it to, what am I best at? And if I was my best always, what does that look like? So yeah, that's my exciting things. But yeah, Relight, RELYTE. So w.relight.co.uk. You can contact me on there. You can find me on Instagram with Relight Coaching, or you can find me at LinkedIn with Tashan Nicholas. So yeah, any of those.
Woo! Oh, amazing. Tashan, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in for another episode of Out of the Office. Thanks, everyone.